The sun was just beginning to rise over the small, wind-blown town of Wisteria Creek, casting long golden fingers across the dust and fences that held together the lives of those who had nothing but land and pride. Among those early morning shadows stood Clara Hensley, a young woman of 20 summers, her dress faded by years of hand-washing and her hands rough from endless work. She wasn't the kind of girl who drew stares at church or laughter from men at the saloon. She wasn't the kind who had silk ribbons in her hair or freckles that looked charming in sunlight. No, Clara was quiet, modest, and, as her mother said too often, too plain for her own good. In a town where beauty often bought mercy, and a pretty face could earn a second chance, being plain was almost a curse. Clara had accepted it, or at least she thought she had, until the morning. Her father called her to the porch with a voice heavy and cold. "Clara, we've come to a decision," he said, avoiding her eyes. Her mother, Ruth, stood beside him, wringing her apron nervously. The wind rustled the dry corn behind them, whispering like ghosts. Clara's heart tightened. "A decision about what, Pa?" He shifted uncomfortably. "About you. We can't keep you here anymore. We got debts and, well, a man's offered to take care of that debt. He's willing to pay good money." Her voice came out small. "To take care of me?" Her mother's eyes filled with shame. "He's a rancher from the other side of the valley. Says he needs help around his land. He's offering $200. That's more than we've seen in a year." Clara stepped back, her breath catching in her throat. "You're selling me," she whispered. "Don't use that word," her father snapped, guilt flashing in his eyes. "You'll have food, a roof, and maybe even a better life. You ought to be thankful." She wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The Hensleys had nothing but land too poor to yield crops and a house that creaked in every wind. Her brothers had gone west looking for gold and never written back. Her parents saw her as one less mouth to feed, and now as the solution to their problems. That night, Clara packed her single suitcase, folded her best dress, and stood at the window looking out at the empty road. The moonlight lay cold on her skin. She'd heard stories about men who bought women for work or worse, and she prayed silently that the man who wanted her had at least a decent heart. At dawn, a wagon rolled into view. The horses were strong and sleek, unlike the bony creatures in town. A tall man stepped down, broad shoulders, dusty hat, and the kind of presence that filled the air. His name was Silas Ward, and he was known around those parts as the rancher, who never smiled. He had built the Double W Ranch from nothing, turning barren land into an empire. Folks said he'd lost his wife years ago and hadn't spoken much since. Some said he'd buried his heart with her. When he saw Clara, his blue-gray eyes lingered a moment longer than she expected. Not in desire, just in thought. He nodded once to her father, handed over a pouch heavy with coins, then looked back at Clara. "You ready?" he asked, his voice low, gravelly, and calm. She swallowed, clutching her suitcase. "Do I have a choice?" He didn't answer, just gestured to the wagon. She climbed in, and as the horses started forward, the distance between her and her parents grew. She didn't look back, not once. Her heart was breaking, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing it. For hours they rode in silence. The land stretched wide and wild, filled with sagebrush and sky. Silas spoke only once to ask if she was hungry, and when she shook her head, he said nothing more. He seemed like a man carrying 1,000 unspoken thoughts, none of them soft. When they reached his ranch, Clara was stunned. Fences ran as far as the eye could see, and cattle grazed under the fading sun. The ranch house stood tall and proud, built from thick pine logs, its windows gleaming with the last light of day. Yet, despite all its grandeur, it felt lonely, the kind of place where laughter had died long ago. "You'll stay in the East Room," Silas said, climbing down. "You'll cook, clean, and help tend the horses. That's all I expect." She nodded quietly, stepping down with trembling hands. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment, eyes unreadable. "Don't sir me. Just do your work and stay out of trouble." And with that he walked inside. For days they lived like strangers under the same roof. Silas spent dawn to dusk on the range, and Clara kept to her chores. She woke early, cooked his meals, and found small comfort in the rhythm of labor. The smell of bread baking, the creak of floorboards, The whisper of wind, it was all she had. She didn't know if she was his servant or something else, but at least he was kind in his silence. He never raised his voice or hand, never made her feel unsafe. That alone was something. One evening after supper, she stepped outside to watch the sunset. The sky burned in colors she'd never seen, scarlet and gold and violet. Silas stood nearby, leaning on the fence, eyes lost in the horizon. For a moment she saw the man behind the hardness. Weary, scarred, and alone, she found her courage. "You must have loved her very much," she said softly. He turned his head. "Who?" "Your wife." He froze, then nodded slowly. "I did." The air hung heavy. "What happened to her?" He hesitated, then said, "Fever. Took her 3 winters ago. Since then, I reckon I've just been keeping busy so I don't have to think." "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked. "Don't be. Life takes what it wants." That night, Clara lay awake, thinking about the sadness in his eyes. For the first time since she'd left home, she didn't feel like a burden or a mistake. She felt seen, not for beauty, not for what she could offer, but for the quiet soul she carried. Weeks passed. Spring warmed the valley, and the ranch began to change. Flowers pushed through the hard earth, and so did something inside both of them. Silas found himself watching her as she worked, how she spoke gently to the horses, how she smiled when the sun hit her face. There was no vanity in her, no demand for attention, just quiet strength, the kind he'd forgotten existed. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast. Clara was out in the field gathering laundry when lightning split the sky. The wind howled, tearing the sheets from her hands. She tried to run for the house, but the rain came so heavy she could barely see. Suddenly, Silas was there, riding up on his black stallion, rain pouring off his hat. He swung down and grabbed her arm. "Are you out of your mind? You'll catch your death." I was trying to save the laundry," she stammered. He shook his head, half angry, half afraid. To hell with the laundry. He lifted her onto the horse and rode hard for the barn, lightning flashing all around. When they finally reached shelter, they were both soaked to the bone. Clara was shivering, her hair clinging to her face. He stared at her for a long moment, then took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You could have been struck," he said quietly. Her voice trembled. "You came for me." He looked down, jaw tight. "Of course I did." Their eyes met, and in that brief, breathless moment, something unspoken passed between them. A flicker of warmth in the cold, the fragile beginning of trust. That night, as the storm raged outside, Clara realized something strange. She no longer feared being sold. She wasn't a possession here. Somehow in this quiet, lonely place, she was starting to feel alive. And for the first time in years, Silas Ward felt it, too, the faint heartbeat of something he thought he'd buried with his past.